Apologies for this interruption, but we have some breaking news.
Good evening, curious minds out there across the internet, and welcome to this very special alert report that I've got for you guys for this evening. This is not the podcast episode that I had hoped to be able to bring you. There is a ton of research for that one. As usual, I find a story and I want to try to cover it, so I jump in with both feet and end up finding way more than I expected or had seen covered before, and it becomes a much larger project than I originally had hoped it to be. So, that one is still in the works, but it will be worth the wait, hopefully, and I'll have that out next week, if all goes well. For now, though, there's a few things I wanted to just jump on here real quick. This isn't even a BTR. This is just kind of a standalone thing that I wanted to put out so that there was something out today and I got a chance to talk about some strange, I will say, events or happenings that have been going on. So I'm working on expanding the podcast. You may or may not have noticed that the episodes are now up from Season 2 on YouTube. It's just the audio version with a static background. But as they come out this season, they will be going up on YouTube as well now. So that's just, hopefully that will bring in a new audience to us. We'll see how that goes. I've also been working on the video versions for some of the episodes from Season 1. And one of those that I felt would be a great one to start off with, just because a lot of what I talked about in that episode involves documents and photos and things that you really need to see presented in order to fully understand or believe, probably in a lot of cases, a lot of the stuff that I was saying in that podcast. So I started with episode 3, part 1 on the 9/11 series, and I've been working on it for a while. I've been having a little bit of trouble with a hard drive situation and getting all of the files that I once had back together so that I can then, through a very strenuous process, turn them into PDF files individually with highlights and then convert those into images that I can import into the production software. So there's a lot of things that are kind of making that a very slow process. But recently, the hardest thing is getting the files that I actually need. So what happened, I guess, first was I needed a picture of the armored truck. The one that I talked about that I'd seen 1,000 times. I'm sure you guys have seen it if you were into this story at all back then. It was an armored truck without any real clear markings that appeared to be, by all accounts, escaping from underneath the Twin Towers right before the event occurred. So they got trapped in the collapse, ultimately, and the driver bailed out, but it was still full of gold. It was fairly widely reported there immediately after, and then those stories started to kind of disappear. But the photo remained. Well, when I went to go find it for this, it was nowhere to be found. It was kind of difficult to find when I did the original podcast, so about a year ago. It was getting really, really hard to find. But I was able to do so. Not this time. It had been completely scrubbed, which seems very, very strange. And scrubbed from a lot of very strange places, too. Even a few little articles that still existed regarding it that had a picture at one point no longer did. So that struck me as extremely odd. I kind of found a workaround for it. I had an idea about how I might be able to get it, and I was just going to move on to the next section and come back to it if I did. So the next section was involving Project Able Danger. Without going through all of that again, there were certain slides, which I had whenever I did that podcast, that have also completely vanished. The PDF for it, the slides, everything is completely gone. I've checked everywhere. I've got one record pool that I'm waiting on. Maybe I can still get my hands on it, but everything else that I found through multiple search engines, from Yandex to Presearch to you name it, I've tried it. Not returning anything. Except things that were written about the topic, but not the actual files. Okay. So I found that very strange. It's weird that 23 years later, all of these things seem to be magically disappearing. I obviously don't feel that it's related to anything that I'm looking into or doing, but I do feel that there is some sort of a purpose behind it, which I will talk about a little bit more at the very end. Then I happened to randomly remember that I had posted all of that Several of the slides from Able Danger should be on the Clandestine Radio Facebook page. So I went back through my feed, scrolled all the way back to the very beginning of it, worked my way back forward till I got to the 9/11 episodes. There's a posting about the episode coming out. There's documents pertaining to the next episode. Nothing. That post is completely gone. It's not in my images. It's not in my uploads. It's nowhere. It was never told to me, anyway, that it was being pulled down or given any kind of a reason. And I have no idea when that happened. But it is very disconcerting. So I just kind of wanted to make you guys aware that this anomalous thing seems to be happening and invite you to kind of keep an eye on that. And if you happen to cross anything that you recall pertaining to at least episode 1 of that podcast series, image-wise, if you could send it to me at clandestinradiopodcast@gmail, or you can send it to the same address on Proton if that makes you feel more comfortable. I would love to get my hands on as much of that as possible. So I felt I would kind of just put a little bit of a call to action out to the community in hopes that maybe you guys have some of this archived or in a folder somewhere, or you're somehow able to find what I cannot. It would be most helpful. And also just let you guys know that it's happening. So you can kind of keep an eye on that. And should something pertaining to the Middle East, which we'll talk about in a second, happen, I would feel that there is some sort of linking back to the events of 9/11. Because it really does, it's starting to anyways, feel like they don't want it to remind people of 9/11, and then people go back and research 9/11 a little better. Something to that effect. I don't know. I honestly don't know. But it is extremely strange at any rate. The second thing that I wanted to talk about is pertaining to this latest Olympics thing. I've had several people ask me or suggest that I cover it or say something about it, and I don't really want to. It is what it is. And at the end of the day, they're going to explain it away however they need to. I think they know that they kind of at least angered the Christian contingent with that one, regardless of if that is just about the Feast of Bacchus and Dionysus and all this stuff. That makes a lot more sense, if we're being honest, pertaining to the Olympics. But the way that they portrayed it, I said I wasn't going to get into it. The way that they portrayed it, definitely, I can see why everyone would think that it is related to that work of art depicting the Last Supper. But I don't know. I wasn't in their minds when they did it, and I think that what's far worse than that, if you want to talk about Olympic openings, going back, I'm going completely out of my memory here for this episode, so bear with me. I think it was the 92 Olympics in Spain, the Barcelona games. I could be completely wrong, but I do remember that there were some really weird symbology, and some things came out about it later on. One giant metal thing that looks an awful lot like a spike protein. It definitely was trying to symbolize a virus, and it was kind of like biological weapons type, portraying it in a very ominous way, you know, and doing the weird Olympic opening thing. Go back and watch it, and you'll see what I'm talking about. But Agenda 21 kicked into effect like a month after that. If you're unaware or don't know what Agenda 21 was, you need to go look that up in full. That's not something I really can fully discuss out here. But it was adopted by at least like 180, somewhere in there, governments, and Rio de Janeiro at that meeting that they had. I think it was the United Nations Conference on Government and Development. That sounds right. That all was kind of the start of it all. That led into Agenda 2030 and all of the other stuff that has come out from the UN. That was kind of the inception point for it. Those Olympics were really weird. I think that a more disturbing than either of the two that we've spoke about so far was definitely the 2012 games, though, which took place in London. And that was, if you missed that opening ceremony, do yourself a favor and search until you find a link for it, because that was a very, very strange thing. It had like kids in hospital beds. You may remember seeing videos of it, with NHS workers dancing around, and then these weird little creatures, demonic looking things, come crawling out, and there's a giant demonic puppet, and it's this huge like to-do presentation thing that very ominously predicts a global pandemic, very much like the coronavirus. So I mean, and if you go back and you really watch it and you kind of count all of the references involved with it, it's kind of hard not to think that it was some sort of a giant COVID predictive programming ritual or something to that effect. I just want to know where all the outrage energy was when all of that stuff came to light, and it was called out in 2020 by lots of people, and we were telling people to go and watch the video and tell us if this does not pertain to what we're just seeing happening, and most people didn't care anything about it. So when you compare it to world-altering events and predictive programming on that scale, even balls out of shorts guy seems kind of tame in comparison. I mean, doesn't it? Yes, it was in horrible taste. It absolutely shouldn't have happened, in my opinion anyway. I think there were way better ways they could have gone about it if that was what they were trying to depict. I think that they chose the most gay Parisian way of doing it. And I think that they probably leaned into the offensive nature of it as well. It is what it is, though, guys. It is what it is. It's definitely nothing that we should be continuing to talk about. So I'm not going to do any kind of at-length show about the recent Olympic thing. And I'm certain, especially with the weird horse and all the other pieces of occult-looking symbolism that was involved, that's always involved. That's my point. It's seemingly always involved with these Olympic opening ceremonies. They're trying to put a message out. They're making it intentionally weird and spooky. And something ends up happening. Almost every time. So I don't think that we've got the full picture anyway. And when you combine that with everything that's going on, I feel personally like something is coming. Probably in the Middle East. I mean, I know that Iran is most likely going to be attacking Israel anytime, which will, of course, pull us and Russia and probably other countries into this fray. And I doubt that it will end nicely, but I just don't think that that's all of it, though. I don't know if it's going to be some sort of false flag event, like I kind of talked about in the last episode there at the end a little. But I do feel that something. Keep your eyes open, guys. I mean, and don't believe what you see if you're watching the media. Trust your heart, trust your mind, think critically, and really examine the things that are going to be happening in the coming months. I would say between now and the end of October, for sure. I wouldn't be surprised if something fairly major does not come along. I don't know if that's the new bird flu pandemic, monkeypox thing, whatever they've cooked up. I don't know if it's going to be a false flag terror event. I don't know exactly what it's going to look like. But I wanted to get this out now and go ahead and tell you that between now and the end of October, I would be incredibly surprised if we did not see something. I don't say that to freak people out. I try to very rarely, if ever, fearmonger or anything that would be misconstrued as that on this show. But I think that it's something that we should keep an eye on and do what you can to prepare just in case or whatever scenario. We've talked about it on the show before. If you've listened to the other BTRs, like the one with the survival guide and all that stuff, just do the small things. Do at least something, though. I would at least, very, very bare minimum, have a decent bug out bag setup going and some sort of food reserves, water reserves, little things that you can do. It won't cost you a ton. It won't take you that long, but it could definitely spell the difference in life and death if it comes down to it. I hope I'm wrong. I always hope that I'm wrong about stuff like that, but I've been right a lot, so it's something to consider. That's all I'm saying. It's something that you should consider doing. And that is honestly all of the, quasi-reporting that I really wanted to do in this. I just wanted to put something out and kind of talk about a couple of points that have been nagging at my brain for the last week. I do have a really good episode coming, I promise. There was just no way of getting it accomplished by today. I'm also waiting on some documents that I think could make a very big difference in the entirety of the case, and will certainly put a whole new angle on it for the podcast episode. So, until I get that, it's going to be very difficult to try to conclude this thing. And I want to try to do this story justice, because it's one of those stories that hasn't been covered to death. It's been talked about. There's a new docuseries out about it that I think falls woefully short of covering the entirety of the story from what I've seen. But it's important, because I think that it kind of pulls back the veil a little bit on the nature of intelligence within this country and abroad. And I think that it discloses a lot of sides of how these systems work. Systems that we spoke about in the last series. That I don't think that you get that level of insight outside of events like this one. I don't want to give away too much of it, but I think that you guys will enjoy it. I'm going to do my best to keep it as lighthearted as I can and bring a very serious story to you in as entertaining of a format as I possibly can. But there is definitely some weight behind that story. Just so much so to the point that it makes me, it's one of those stories that makes me a little nervous to cover, if I'm being honest. So is another story that I'm working on right now simultaneously. But they're important. And if they don't get covered and the information doesn't get out there, by every source and means possible, then these stories will end up getting memory hold. The same way they try to do with everything that they don't want to talk about. And I feel that a big part of my duty to the show and to society as a whole through this show is to at least do my part, however far that reach actually goes, to try to keep that from happening. I sincerely appreciate all of you guys for listening. Thank you very much for sharing this with others. It's been very wild to watch how the show has spread to every continent, essentially, and how all these countries are tuning in weekly, which is something that I never expected to happen. You guys are awesome. Thank you so much for listening. Take care of yourselves and each other, and I'll talk to you guys again real soon on the next Clandestine Radio.